Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I am doing great today, Tim. We have such a perplexing mystery that we're going to be talking about today. A really tragic one. It involves many elements that, again, like we cover a lot on this show, a lot of these elements that are really hard to put your finger on. And some of them feel very unrelated. But before we get into all of that, Tim, I want to know how you're doing today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well over here, and I'm definitely interested in going over this case. This research was brought to us by Kathleen Studer. Great job by Kathleen once again. Thank you for the research. This is the disappearance of Diane Louise Young Augat, and she went missing from Odessa, Florida, and there had been some sightings in Hudson, Florida. But she went missing in April 10th of 1998.
And you just thanked Kathleen Studer. I just want to double up on that. Kathleen does a great job in her research documents, and it's always reassuring when you have the material and you know that it's so well researched, and we really want to make sure that we cover Diane's disappearance as best we can because it does speak on a number of levels, including the warning signs and how to maintain the proper health care for people who are affected by some mental disorder, some emotional disorder or distress.
And Diane was 40 years old at the time of her disappearance. She's a woman. She is white, 5'4", 130 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white tank top, blue shorts, and white sneakers. She has dark blonde hair, blue eyes, tattoos on her back and right shoulder, fingernails painted coral, a scar on her abdomen, and pierced ears.
And before we get into Diane's story, if anyone has any information on what happened to her, they are instructed to contact the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, specifically Detective Mark Celeste at 727-847-5878, and reference case number 98-15054.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break for commercial, and we're going to be right back to discuss Diane Augat's disappearance. Please follow us on social media at MissingCSM. So Diane Louise Young was born in 1958 in Brooklyn, New York, to James and Mildred Young. And she was the second child born, with one older sister, Deborah, one younger sister, Denise, and one younger brother named James. And at some point, the family moved to Florida.
And it was in Florida where Diane met and married Frederick Augat, who was 12 years older than her. They had their first child, a son, in 1980, and they had two more children in 1983 and 1985. Both of those were girls.
And Fred ran an assisted living facility in Land O'Lakes, Florida. And according to Diane's sister, Denise, she had $100 pocketbooks. She was pretty. There could be 1,000 people in the room, and you'd notice her.
Her family went on to say that she was a meticulous housewife who doted on the three children, and she loved to go camping and fishing with the family. She also loved music.
Diane really seemed to have the perfect life. However, in the late 1980s, a storm was brewing within her. And in 1988, Child Protective Services had child abuse charges filed against her. And it was alleged that she may have Munchausen's by proxy, as she continually brought at least one of her children to the doctor's office. And she was eventually acquitted, but at that time the children were removed from her custody. It's always very tragic.
Really tragic. And Munchausen's by proxy, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's essentially when you have a fictitious disorder that you are, I guess, imposing on someone else. And it is typically associated with parents and their children. And I did a quick search on this to see what the combined annual incidence of Munchausen by proxy is. And for children under the age of 1, it's at least 2.8 in every 100,000. So I'm not sure if that's common or if that's rare, but it feels to me like that is not as rare as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious where that stems from specifically with Diane, because we don't have any indication that this was something that happened to her during her upbringing, but a really tragic thing to have happen to her children.
But also in the late 80s, Diane was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and her manic episodes became intolerable. And in 1991, her and Fred divorced, and he took custody of their children. So that could be some insight into the potential Munchausen's by proxy.
Yeah. And she had her first child in 1980, the subsequent daughters in 83 and 85. So it kind of feels to me like this was something that had been there and present, sort of just laying dormant and just escalating over the course of these years.
Yeah, well, I think the age that most people are diagnosed with bipolar is like mid-20s, and this would kind of fit for Diane, being born in 1958, and this really not showing itself until, I guess, the late 80s. So she's probably late 20s at that point.
Yeah, right. And I wonder how many incidents might have happened in 1968, 1970, when she's a young woman, growing up. Was this something that had become, were there moments where her parents just wrote it off as a child being, or a girl growing into womanhood? Were these just written off as a child acting out or something?
Well, Diane was devastated at the loss of her children, and she was alone and not taking her medication for bipolar reliably, which is a serious problem. You got to take that every day. And so she spiraled out of control, and she started abusing alcohol and drugs while hanging out with unsavory people. And between this time and the time she went missing, she was arrested numerous times, as well as committed to mental health facilities at least 32 times through the Baker Act.
Right. And the Baker Act of Florida allows individuals to be involuntarily committed under specific criteria, such as inability to care for themselves or being a risk to themselves or others. So this happened 32 times. It seems like a lot, and it makes me wonder what the point of this Baker Act is if you're going to just have it happen dozens of times to the same person. Like, what is the treatment that is followed up with? Like, how does somebody get committed 32 times without any further evaluation or further treatment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Diane had some problems with the law as well. But I guess I would say, to answer your question, I would just say you can't force somebody to take the medication. I think that might be where these troubles continued here.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at, is like, you can involuntarily commit somebody under certain criteria, but there is no involuntarily providing them with the proper treatment once they're out. So
Right.
you just commit them. Would they stay there for a couple of weeks or something, or maybe a month or something, and then you've done your time, and then you're let out. So what after 10 times, no one was like, oh, maybe we should probably give her mandatory therapy sessions or something. I don't know. Maybe they did and they didn't help. But this is the first point in this story where I started to get really frustrated.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. It is frustrating. And I wonder if she was just taking the medicine while in the facility and then not when she was out, And I don't know how you better control that situation, because I'm sure the facility was just doing what they were, supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. With therapy, that could have gone a long way, could have helped. But I do think we've come a long way when we're comparing 1990 to 2025.
Yeah.
And during this time, she wasn't the only one having troubles with the law. In 1991, her father was busted in a pinochle group for gambling, and he and a few others were issued citations in Hudson, Florida, after someone called police and complained their group was loud and used foul language.
Tim, are you familiar with the game Pinochle?
I am not. You know a bit about this?
Not much. I knew that my parents used to play it. They had some friends that would come over and they play Pinochle, and it just resonated because it's a funny name and it doesn't look like the way it's pronounced. And I was like, oh, Pinochle. I can explain this on air, what Pinochle is, and I can't. I even looked it up. It's a card game that involves 42 cards. Sometimes it involves 80 cards. I was looking forward to explaining to the listeners what pinochle was. And as I was reading it, I was like, I can't explain this. It'll take far too long. But my point of this is that it's not like you're gambling at poker. Like, her father wasn't playing. This is a really specific game to get in trouble for gambling over, I think.
Yeah.
Like, there's a huge community for poker. People can illegally gamble on blackjack or some other card game that is not as, I don't want to say rare, but this just isn't like in that same like wheelhouse.
Yeah, and I mean, how illegal really is this? Like, it seems like the group being loud might have been more of a problem than the actual gambling. I mean, families gamble all the time, playing cards. God, if you're on a flight with a sports team, what do you think they're doing? The whole flight. So give me a break. Give me a break with charging them.
Yeah, it wasn't like, I don't know. It's just, if this had said that he had been busted, quote, gambling while playing poker, I just think it would have it would have just like kind of rolled off of me. It would have rolled past me. I wouldn't have wanted to get so hung up on this, but pinochle was just so unique. And you don't read this. It doesn't make headlines in the paper. Like, you don't hear about these like illegal pinochle rings.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that being loud and using foul language kind of comes with gambling. You know, if you're winning or losing.
Winning or losing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
yeah,
let's drop it there.
Let's drop it there. Yeah.
So Hudson, Florida. Hudson, Florida is located on the west coast of Florida, north of Tampa, and it's included in the Tampa Metropolitan Statistical Area. It had a population of just over 12,000 per the 2010 census, and the median age of the people living there is just over 64 years old.
The violent crime rate is slightly lower than the state of Florida as a whole, but in a 2018 letter to the editor of the Tampa Bay Times, it was noted that there was a significant drug meth problem in Hudson. Now, I just want to repeat that was a 2018 letter to the editor of the Tampa Bay Times, so it makes me wonder what that problem looked like when Diane disappeared. Was there a drug problem in the area? Was it meth just introducing itself to that area, or was it another drug? Because if this was in 2018 and it was recorded as being a problem, it was recorded as being a drug problem, specifically meth in Hudson, I just wonder how long that had been building up.
Yeah, I just looked it up, and it definitely seems like there's been some issues in Hudson, Florida, in recent years involving meth. But I guess that this was part of the Tampa Bay metropolitan area, and maybe it's just a little better hidden when you're in the suburbs in like a 12,000 person town outside of the major city. You can live in a house in a residential neighborhood with 60-year-old neighbors and maybe try to fly under the radar.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wonder how that looked in the early mid-90s.
Yeah, it's a good question. And on Good Friday, April 10th, 1998, Diane was a couple weeks out from her latest stay at a mental health facility. And the family agreed that the best thing was for her to stay with her sister Deborah at her house in the 12,000 block of Cobblestone Drive in Hudson, Florida. And Deborah had a doctor's appointment that morning, and when she got home, Diane was not there.
Diane's mother, Mildred, made a missing persons report on the afternoon of April 10th, so she did that pretty quick. If the first day that Diane had been not seen, then it wasn't like she waited even a day. So it was on the afternoon of April 10th that she was reported missing, and it was on April 15th that we have our first piece of very curious and, I don't know, telling, our first piece of evidence here that she was perhaps abducted. So Mildred was outside when a call came in, and it went to her voicemail, and the voicemail was Diane's voice saying, "Help, let me out." And then some shuffling around, presumably as if someone was trying to grab the phone, followed by another voice stating, quote, "Give me that." So we don't have whether or not this voice was male or female, but another voice said, "Give me that." And presumably, again, we're talking about the phone.
Yeah, I think it sounds like Diane probably said, "Give me that." But the caller ID showed Starlight. But calls Mildred made to that number went unanswered, and it's unknown if police checked into it further. Strange.
Very strange.
Caller ID said Starlight.
Yeah, and you're probably right about the voice being Diane saying, "Give me that."
Yeah, I'm guessing whoever was trying to grab the phone actually grabbed it and probably
Yeah.
hung up after that. Yeah. And also on the night of April 15th, a woman walking to work around the intersection of Highway 19 and New York Avenue saw what looked like a fingertip with bright nail polish on the side of the road. And she didn't think it was real. She thought it was fake or maybe some kind of joke or prank. And she went home and told her boyfriend what she saw. And the next day, he went out to look for it, and he called police.
Okay, so this is clearly the most eyebrow-raising moment of this story. The voicemail with Diane's voice is telling. A fingertip on the side of the road is, again, very eyebrow-raising, and made me wonder what I would do if that happened to me, if I found or saw something that looked like a fingertip on the side of the road. What would you do?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would call the police or something just to be safe, because don't we always hear that when people find a body or even a body part, it seems like it's fake to the person, or they say they think it was a doll or a mannequin or something like that. So just knowing that, I would wonder if it was real,
Yeah. Would you try to pick it up?
Probably wouldn't pick it up. I might nudge it a little bit with my foot or something like that, just to see if I could tell if it was real or not.
Yeah.
But this actually ended up being the top third of Diane's middle right finger, and it was identified from prints taken from previous arrests of Diane. So it is confirmed to be her fingertip.
And police searched the area all around where the fingertip was found, including a helicopter circling around. They didn't find anything else, though. And I don't want to be gruesome here, but I was wondering how clean of a cut this was.
Yeah, that's a good question, especially when considering nothing else was found.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems like it could have been thrown out of a car window or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So what's the significance of this? Why would you cut a fingertip off? Would you cut it off yourself? Would you cut a fingertip off so that you could leave fingerprints somewhere else and misdirect? They didn't do that. They didn't do it for any sort of ransom, like we have Diane, pay us this, and here's proof that we have her. This feels like a red herring of sorts, but it's not, because it's actually her finger.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very strange and gruesome.
Are you just torturing this woman?
Yeah, it's a great question.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And the first news article came out on April 18th of that year, and then tips started coming in. So a bartender at the Hayloft Tavern reported that Diane had been there on April 10th, which was the day she went missing.
But the bartender had cut her off because she was walking in circles. Quote, walking in circles.
Yeah, which seems severely drunk.
Severely drunk, maybe a bad reaction to medication she was taking, plus the alcohol.
Or drugs.
Or, yes, exactly, medication or illegal drugs and the alcohol. So severely intoxicated. Someone reported seeing Diane walking on Highway 19, where her fingertip was recovered on April 11th, between 3 and 4 p.m. as well.
So that's in the afternoon. That's daylight.
Yep.
And on April 15th, the day she made the call to her mom, a waitress reported serving her lunch at the inn at the Gulf.
Okay, so on the 15th, a lot of actions happened.
Yeah.
We have the phone call to the mom with Diane's voice and a parent struggle to get the phone back or to retrieve the phone, which is on the voicemail. The caller ID shows Starlight. No one answered when Mildred called that number back. The fingertip is found right around the same area that she was seen walking on Highway 19. And now we learn that she was seen walking near that area where the fingertip was found a few days before on the 11th, which was the day after she was reported missing.
Right.
And we have one more thing on the 15th where she was reported by a waitress eating lunch at the inn at the Gulf. So it's not like one of those stories we talk about where someone disappeared without a trace. There's several days here where there's consistent, seemingly legit sightings.
So what was going on with Diane between April 10th, the day her family reported her missing, and April 15th when she left a message and had lunch at the inn at the Gulf? So Diane's mother, Mildred, thought Diane knew the person she was with when she made that phone call, and Diane did have her own residence on Chesapeake Drive in Odessa, approximately 18 miles southeast from her sister's house.
And another weird moment happens here. On April 23rd, a clerk at a convenience store on Highway 54 at Gun Highway in Odessa found a laundry bag of neatly folded clothes tucked in an outdoor freezer case. So I think one of those like ice cases where you go and buy the bags of ice. That's what I was imagining here with the outdoor freezer case.
Yep.
She was concerned they might be Diane's, so she called Diane's sister Deborah, which I think speaks to sort of the smallness of this area, that this clerk knows Diane's disappearance enough to think these might be Diane's clothes, and she also knows Diane's sister enough where she can make a phone call to her.
Right. Yeah. Good call there. She must have known her to some degree as someone hanging around. And Deborah actually recognized the clothing, some of which she had given Denise, clothing that had been at Diane's Odessa home. And the clerk had no idea why they were put there. She stated the last time she looked in the freezer was 3 weeks prior. So I guess a lot of people not buying ice down there.
And sort of a side detail here, Diane was known for letting juveniles hang out with her at her Odessa home. Police seem to think that they could have placed the clothing there, as it was suspected her house was looted following her going missing. So with that knowledge, it was reported police couldn't decide if finding her clothing neatly folded at the convenience store was a clue or not. I don't understand how that's not a clue.
Yeah, it's some kind of clue.
It's definitely a clue. I'm not law enforcement, but the clothing that belonged to the missing person folded neatly in an outdoor freezer case feels to me like a clue.
So that's really a weird thing. I do wonder how they didn't identify who put the clothes there. Like, even in the 90s, there are cameras around. So I kind of wish they figured that part of this mystery out.
Yeah, do they not keep that case locked? I guess not.
Yeah, I guess not. And on Friday, November 24th, 2000, more than 2.5 years after Diane went missing, a news article about Diane was published in the Tampa Bay Times, hoping to revive the case. And the sheriff's office was quoted as talking to more than 100 people and putting a tremendous amount of work into finding Diane. And Mildred talked of hope of finding Diane alive.
And the next day, Diane's brother's girlfriend walked into the Circle K north of Hudson near the Viva Villas development off Highway 19. Circle K is a well-known convenience store, by the way. And the girlfriend noticed a clear bag on top of the lottery counter with the name Diane marked in black marker.
Right. And the bag contained black eyeliner, taboo perfume, bright pink lipstick, and generic toothpaste. And Mildred said these are all items that Diane would have owned, and the toothpaste was the same brand given out by the mental health facility that Diane was recently at.
And about 3 months before she went missing, Diane had been in a manic state and was found wandering around Viva Villas. Officers brought her to Mildred's house after that, but this seems like a definite clue or a pretty significant coincidence.
Yeah, it sure seems like, the police kind of tried to help her. That actually seems empathetic of them bringing her to her mom's place instead of just, having her locked up again. But it seems like Diane walked a lot around that area and probably knew most of the workers in the area. Like, it seemed like she frequented these convenience stores, probably knew some other local workers as well.
So this was in 2000. This was in November of 2000, so 2 years after she disappeared. Do you think that it's possible that this is her, that this is the same person that Diane marked on the bag of the makeup and the toothpaste, that maybe she was in the convenience store in the Circle K and had freshened up for the day and left her toiletries behind?
I think there's even a chance that it had been there for 2 years, on top of the lottery machine. I mean, maybe just no one took it down.
Maybe. I was thinking lottery counter, like where they like do their keno. So either it could have been there for 2 years, or Diane has been popping up in various locations and was still alive then.
Yeah, I mean, she'd be more recognizable without part of her finger at that point.
And she would have had to have gotten some sort of, maybe not, I was going to say medical attention for that, but maybe not.
And finally, a possible suspect emerges. On Wednesday, June 27th, 2001, 2 masked gunmen came into the Coral Sands Hotel at about 4 a.m. and assaulted the manager. And the manager yelled for her boyfriend and the co-manager, who ran out to the lobby as the gunmen ran away. And the next night, Thursday, Coral Sands manager Gary Robert Evers found and shot a person that he thought was one of the gunmen from the night before. He shot him several times with his 9mm.
However, it was determined that the victim was not one of the 2 gunmen from the night before, and Evers was arrested and charged with murder.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so on Friday afternoon, the next day, a detective called Diane's sister Deborah to tell her that Evers was arrested. And Deborah told the St. Petersburg Times that Evers had been a suspect in the disappearance of her sister for a long time.
And detectives back in 1998 told her that they knew Diane had been seen around the Coral Sands, which had been run by Gary Evers and his girlfriend since 1997. And Gary Evers was convicted of first-degree murder on the 28th of April, 2004. I was really surprised by this. He was given life without the possibility of parole, and nothing more was mentioned about the possible connection with Diane's case.
Why was that surprising?
Though that whole moment was surprising to me because he could have used the self-defense in this, thinking that it was one of the people who had committed that assault the night before. So he could have used that, and it could have been legit. Even though it was determined that the victim wasn't one of the assailants from the previous night, that's a really good defense. So it struck me as odd that he got life without parole. Maybe he had some priors that were weighing against him or something.
I'm guessing that Gary just targeted this guy completely incorrectly. I'm not sure what made him think it was the masked gunman from the night before, but just having a mask on would probably make the person difficult to recognize the next day. So I'm guessing he was a little crazy in shooting this Todd Cammers to death.
And the other curious part of this was that, again, he's given life without the possibility of parole. I wonder if there was a moment where he said, I have information on the whereabouts of Diane Augat, if he actually was a suspect or actually had a connection to her disappearance, because maybe he could have worked out a deal. Maybe we have possibility of parole, and I'll give you some information on Diane, and maybe they didn't listen to him, or maybe he never mentioned it. But I would think, like, if he had any involvement in her disappearance and he's facing life without the possibility of parole, he would use that as some sort of leverage.
But unfortunately, the case goes cold and years go by and Diane's name really no longer appears in newspapers. The Coral Sands Hotel is now just a concrete slab as if it never existed. Mildred slowly lost the rest of her family too. First her daughter Denise in 2007, then Deborah in 2012, and finally James the third in 2021. Her husband James Jr. is gone too, and Mildred left us on August 31st, 2024, so just less than a year ago. And Diane's children are now left to pick up the mystery of what happened to their mother.
And one of those children makes a single post on Web Sleuths in 2017. The only one they ever make to this date. So there was only one post by one of the children on Web Sleuths in 2017, which they note as of 2017, Gary Evers, the man who was convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, is dead as well. And they also go on to say that the Pasco County Sheriff's Office is giving them little cooperation, seeming to dismiss the case as if it's not their problem anymore.
And they said that they called the PCSO 6 months prior and never got a return call, which is shameful, I will say. Not returning family phone calls in a missing persons case is kind of rotten, to be honest. So return the call. What are you doing?
Return the call. Even say we have nothing, but, we appreciate you following up. Just return the call.
Yeah.
That's not one of those things where they can say we're so short-staffed we can't return every single call. You can actually. That should be part of your job.
Yeah, it's pretty quick and easy. But it does sound like they did a decent investigation earlier, maybe, a couple decades earlier. But I'm wondering, and I'm kind of just guessing if they just think that this Gary Evers actually committed the murder, and they understood they didn't have any evidence to charge him. He was already in prison. But to your point from earlier, why wouldn't he have confessed and used that as leverage? I don't know. I guess maybe he didn't do it, but or maybe he didn't want to get his girlfriend in trouble, who may have been an accomplice.
Maybe, but what's the motive here too? Drug related?
Well, he sounds crazy. I mean, he's just shooting a guy that had nothing to do with, trying to rob him. So I don't know. I would say that he just might be, not well.
Yeah.
And violent.
Yeah. And that whole robbing scenario just kind of, I don't know, stinks a little bit to me. Like, how do we even know that the robbery was for real anyway?
Right.
My point is, how do we know that the robbery wasn't mentioned after he killed this person? Maybe he kills this person and says, I thought he was one of the people that robbed us last night, and creates this robbery story, right? Were there camera accounts of the robbery? I don't know.
It's not in the research. And I also wonder, it doesn't sound like anything was actually stolen. It sounded like there was an attempt, or at least per his account, there was an attempt. But it sounds like the masked gunman left in a hurry.
Right, after he comes running out.
Right, and really, what are you trying to get from a hotel anyway?
Why are you robbing a hotel?
Money in the register? There's not going to be much cash in a register at a hotel anyway.
No.
So
no.
I think your instinct in questioning that story is good. Very solid instinct there.
Again, it just stems from the whole life without possibility of parole. That feels so extreme to me for somebody who could have used a self-defense plea. And Kathleen always does this great thing where she attaches the maps of the areas in question, because we like to get a good, geographical sense of where someone disappeared. And it's like this square. It's this square on the west coast of Florida, just above Tampa. And there is actually a way to walk sort of diagonally from Odessa to Hudson. And it takes just over 7 hours. And it's just under 20 miles. And it's this kind of diagonal with some, turns here and there. But for the most part, it's a very direct way to walk all the way up to Hudson. Half an hour to drive, just over 2 hours for public transportation. But I was surprised to see that there's actually walking directions.
Yeah. So Diane had a, geographical square or triangle that she traversed in. She had her apartment at Chesapeake Drive, kind of in the south area, and her clothing was located in that freezer not far from where she lived. But then pretty much everything else played out further north, like 18, 19 miles north. Finger was found. She had a meal at the inn at the Gulf, and there's the Coral Sands Hotel, the Circle K. So it sounded like she did a lot of, I want to say, walking around that area, especially north of where she lived, that area in Hudson.
So as Kathleen stated, the Coral Sands Hotel does not exist anymore, but the location of the Coral Sands Hotel to where the finger was found, if I'm looking at this correctly, seems like just one block. There's New York Ave, and I believe the Coral Sands Hotel was the block north of New York Ave.
Well, interesting story, and that's kind of where it ends. Gary Evers passed away in 2017, and he was the only publicly named suspect in the case, so I have to wonder if police really believed it was him. But if you have any information about what happened to Diane Augat, please contact the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, Detective Mark Celeste, at 727-847-5878 and reference case number 98-15054.
Or you can contact Crime Stoppers of Tampa Bay at 1-800-873-TIPS, TIPS, or submit a tip online.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial, and we'll be right back here with final thoughts.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Back here for final thoughts. Geez, this is a quite a mysterious and tragic case. I am just going to suggest it was probably that Gary Evers fella who did something to Diane, but I don't know. I don't feel like we have a great idea of what her life was like. As far as the characters in her life beyond her mom and sisters and brother. And, you know, it does seem like she was doing a lot of walking, a lot of probably talking to, you know, people in her travels, workers at convenience stores, hotels, things like that. So she was probably known for at least a period of time in that area by some of those people. And really, the reason I'm mentioning it is because Evers was one of those people, and, you know, Diane would have appeared susceptible to violence, probably. But I just wish we had a better sense of who else was she hanging around with. Does she have any boyfriends around that time? Because, I don't know, this Evers person seems like a loose cannon, but there's really nothing connecting him to Diane other than the location.
Right. And one question that we didn't bring up while we were discussing this during the episode, I'll bring up here in the final thoughts. There's been nothing other than her fingertip physically found. There's the clothing, but I mean, like, physically, there was nothing on camera that we've heard of. There was no other accounts of her being anywhere else aside from this radius in the middle of Western Florida. And I don't know if this guy Evers is responsible for this. I keep going back again to that life without the possibility of parole. And why wouldn't he, even if he didn't do it, why wouldn't he say, I have information on this, just to get some sort of plea, some sort of deal here? And then my brain goes to, as I'm looking at the street view on Google Maps, how like flat and very Florida-like this area is. We have Highway 19, we have State Highway 52, which runs east to west or west to east, however you want to look at that. And on the other side, we have 589, which is north to south. And 589 continues north for quite a distance here in Florida. But my brain went to, as does 19. 19 goes right up the coast. And I started thinking about truck drivers. And I started thinking about Diane walking. And I started thinking about Samuel Little and serial killers that we've never heard of who operate as truck drivers and pick up people in Diane's situation. People who have someone looking for them, but if a couple of years go by, they drop off the news cycle. That made me want to thank Kathleen Studer even more for this one, because this is a tough year area to cover. The 80s and 90s, there's no social media, but there is a lot of, maybe even an overabundance of newspapers and news media covering cases. So she got lost in the saturation of all of that. And there's no Facebook to look into. There's, you know, they reference Web Sleuths when Web Sleuths became a thing, but there was only one post from the family. So I feel like the 80s, 90s, tough time to get some information on somebody because they were probably saturated out of the news cycle. But what are your feelings on this being like a pickup, like a truck driver?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. I think that was good on you mentioning Samuel Little. I will say I don't think the finger part would fit with the profile of Samuel Little and his other victims. We also don't know if Diane was doing any sex work. If she was, then I think Little is more likely. The truck driver idea, totally a possibility. You're talking about these are kind of like highway type roads that she's walking on. I do think that's a possibility, but I guess I'm still going to lean towards this Evers guy just because he's such a loose cannon. He shot someone randomly for no reason, essentially, that we know of. So I don't know. I wonder if his girlfriend who was working at that hotel was also questioned, because that seems like she would have had more information, or she would have had some idea if he did do anything to Diane.
Right. And no body.
Right. I mean, I guess we can presume she was probably killed at some point after the 15th, right? After her finger was found.
Yeah. Right after or right in that time period.
Yeah.
And what do you do with a body out there? Do you put it in the water, in the ocean?
Certainly gators in that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
What's the point of cutting off a fingertip?
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe to exert some control or some kind of punishment or something like that, unless it was just a knife fight, but even still, have to be a really sharp knife to swing at someone and cut their finger off.
This one's definitely, I say eyebrow raising, but it's definitely going to be one that kind of sticks with me for a while, because there's no organization to it, which is frustrating. It feels like it's very disorganized, her disappearance, but somebody definitely has gotten away with something here, and they lucked into getting away with it.
Right. Yeah, I think she was definitely met with foul play. Just don't have many names as to who could have done it.
Well, if any family members out there and they want to come on and talk about it, maybe they have more specific information that we're just not seeing here, because again, you can only take the info that's out there, and the info at the time, again, it wasn't family members posting on Facebook or Instagram. These were accounts that were printed in various publications like Web Sleuths and the Doe Network, the Charlie Project, NamUs.
So once again, if you have any information, please call the Pasco County Sheriff's Office at 727-847-5878. And thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week with more.